Welcome to my channel, where every mystery pulls you deeper into the truth, and every silent detail holds a secret waiting to be uncovered. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he arrives in a quiet riverside village, where a woman's elegant dress is found neatly folded, still damp from the river, though no one saw her enter, and no one saw her leave. The town insists it's an accident, but Poirot knows accidents do not fold clothes, so carefully. Stay with me till the end, because the truth hiding behind that soaked dress will reveal a betrayal colder than the river itself, and a motive stitched in heartbreak and greed. So pour yourself a cup of tea and settle in, because today's case is worth every second, until the very end. Chapter 1. The dress still damp from the river. It began, as such affairs often do, not with a scream or the sound of breaking glass, but with silence too perfect, too poised, like the moment before a pianist strikes the first dissonant note. The village of Incombe Hollow, nestled against the wooded hills and bordered by the wide black bend of the River Mavelle, had been known more for its fog than for its scandal. But scandal had arrived nonetheless, veiled in wet silk and carried on whispers between garden hedges. The annual midsummer fete was to blame, or so it would later be claimed. The riverside estate of Sir Leonard Braithwaite had played host, its manicured lawns and cypress-shaded colonnades brimming with white parasols, laughter, and too much champagne. Guests from London, from the theatre world, even a few minor aristocrats gathered for the unveiling of a controversial sculpture, titled The Drowned Muse, created by Sir Leonard's much younger second wife, Helena Braithwaite. That Helena had once been a stage actress was known. That she was rumored to have been a mistress to a baron before her marriage to Leonard was known. Whispered and richly embroidered. That she had enemies was inevitable. That someone would want her dead was still a thought unspoken until dawn broke, and the river gave her back. It was a gardener, poor Mr. Caldwell, who found the body tangled in reeds not far from the boathouse. She was still in her fete attire, a lavender satin gown clinging to her like skin, soaked and shimmering in the morning mist. One shoe was gone. Her fingers were cut and curled, as if she'd clawed at something in the dark. Her hair, normally coiled with theatrical precision, streamed like weed in the water. "She's dead," he had muttered to no one, backing away slowly as if afraid she might still move. Within the hour, the village was in an uproar. Sir Leonard collapsed into a faint that bordered on the theatrical. A maid reportedly fled the house weeping. Local constable Brigstone arrived and cordoned off the area. But it was clear from the start this was no simple drowning. Helena Braithwaite, whose eyes were still open as if to accuse, had been murdered. It was not just the cut on her temple half obscured by hair and mud that made this obvious, nor the bruises beneath her arms, subtle and half hidden. It was the fact that she had never been near the river that night. She had spent the evening in the drawing room, performing a soliloquy from Antigone, and afterward dancing, yes, dancing with at least 3 gentlemen and 1 too attentive lady. And yet, someone had dragged her down to the river after midnight and returned her there. Like an offering, the house became a locked room of secrets. Those who had rooms on the upper floors insisted they had seen or heard nothing. The cook had fallen asleep in the kitchen. The maid, Eleanor, was crying more than could be explained by grief. And Sir Leonard himself, once revived, claimed he had been asleep with a mild sedative in his veins, prescribed, he assured everyone. For my nerves, a telephone call was made. Not to Scotland Yard, though they would eventually send someone, but to Belgium, or more precisely, to London, to the discreet residence of a certain Belgian detective known for his mustache, and for the terrifying accuracy with which he saw through the cracks of the human soul. Hercule Poirot, it was said, had recently retired, again, but retirement, like truth, is easily disturbed. By the time the sun was at its highest and Helena's body had been removed to the chapel house, a message had been delivered. "I will come at once. H.P. the river." Meanwhile, flowed on slow and dark, knowing more than it should and saying nothing. And in the west-facing guest room, a single item remained overlooked, a pale silk dressing gown. Flung across the foot of a chaise lounge. Still damp, still faintly perfumed. And very much out of place. Chapter 2. Shadows beneath the surface. Eve. Train that carried Hercule Poirot into the village of Incombe Hollow. Chugged through a countryside washed in reluctant summer light. Wheat fields rippled like brushed silk. Fog clung to the river's edge, stubborn as regret. Poirot sat upright in the first-class carriage, perfectly still save for the occasional flick of his fingers against his perfectly pressed lapel. His luggage, a single valise and a lacquered walking stick, remained untouched on the rack above him. He had not spoken since boarding, save for a polite merci to the conductor. His thoughts, as always, were busy arranging details like chess pieces before the board was even fully revealed. Waiting for him at the modest Incombe Hollow station was Inspector Fawke, a thin man with a florid complexion, who did not quite know how to hide his skepticism behind manners. Fawke extended his hand, which Poirot ignored, offering instead a nod so precise it seemed choreographed. "You are welcome, I'm sure, Monsieur Poirot. Sorry it's under such morbid circumstances." Poirot offered a small, unreadable smile. "Death rarely sends a pleasant invitation, Inspector. And yet, one must answer. The short ride to Braithwaite House was a study in unease. The estate loomed over the river like an aging dowager, elegant, but somehow disapproving of time. Its shutters were half drawn despite the daylight, and the once pristine white columns showed creeping veins of mildew. Fawke talked mostly to fill the silence. She was a striking woman, Helena Braithwaite. Bit theatrical, yes, but well-liked by some. Others, well, he shifted uncomfortably. The locals had mixed feelings. "People say she unsettled things." "Unsettled," murmured Poirot. "An interesting word. Not provoked, not deserved." "I didn't mean, you meant what you meant. Please continue." They were met at the front door by Sir Leonard's manservant, a square-shouldered veteran named Hargrove, whose measured tone could have served at a military funeral. "Sir Leonard is indisposed. He will receive Monsieur Poirot in the drawing-room shortly." The house smelled faintly of lavender and damp ashwood. Poirot's eyes flit from the worn edges of the carpet to the faint mark on the wall, above the mantel where, perhaps, a painting had recently been removed. Nothing escaped his notice, though he said little. They waited in the drawing-room beneath a painted ceiling that featured women with blindfolded eyes, pouring urns into an unseen void. The sculpture The Drowned Muse, still draped in black cloth, stood in the corner, casting a long, accusing shadow. Sir Leonard entered with the slow, uneven gait of a man who had once been strong and had grown tired of pretending he still was. His morning attire was impeccable. His face was not. "I won't insult your intelligence, Monsieur Poirot, by pretending I am calm. I have lost my wife, my partner." He paused. "Some say I lost her years ago. They will say worse now." Poirot inclined his head. "And you are prepared to hear worse?" "I am prepared to hear the truth, whether I like it or not." Poirot offered no comfort. "Then you are ahead of many." Sir Leonard's eyes lingered on the veiled sculpture. "She made that, you know, just days before she died. Called it prophetic. Said it came to her in a dream." Poirot turned toward the draped figure, then back. "Did she often dream of drowning?" "No," Sir Leonard said. "She feared it." Inspector Fawke cleared his throat. "If you please, Poirot, we've prepared the victim's bedroom for your inspection. There are inconsistencies, Mace-bean, sir," said Poirot softly, and followed them up the wide staircase that creaked beneath Sir Leonard's absence. The room was large, its windows facing the river. A dressing table bore the scattered remains of a night-cut short-open perfume, a broken comb tooth, a silk scarf folded but not quite aligned. But Poirot's eyes went straight to the lounge near the fireplace, the dressing gown, he murmured. Still damp, Falk confirmed, and no one recalls her returning from the fate to change. Most say she never left the ballroom. Poirot knelt, his fingers hovering just above the fabric. No mud on the hem, no weeds or burrs. And yet she was found in the reeds. He looked up slowly. Someone dressed her after death, or brought her here, soaked and broken, and laid her gently upon velvet. Falk's eyes widened. Then why leave the dressing gown? Poirot smiled faintly. Because to remove it would have been more intimate than murder. There was silence then, a house holding its breath again, and downstairs, in the servants' quarters, a maid named Eleanor twisted a silver locket in her hands, waiting for the moment she could no longer keep her secret. Chapter 3. The gathering of the living drawing room of Braithwaite House had been transformed from a stage of celebration to a chamber of suspicion. The wide bay windows remained shuttered despite the golden afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the parquet floor. Hargrove, ever composed, served tea with the precision of a clock wound too tightly. The cups clinked like muffled accusations. Poirot, seated at the center of the gathering like a conductor before a discordant orchestra, surveyed the room with half-lidded eyes. To an outsider, he might have seemed weary, but Inspector Falk, standing nearby, had begun to understand. This was when Poirot did his most incisive work, watching, listening, allowing silence to trap the truth. Sir Leonard sat nearest to the fireplace, shoulders hunched as though aging by the hour. To his right was Miss Clytemnestra Vale, a guest of the fete and close friend to Helena. She wore black already, a gesture that struck some as premature and others as theatrical. Her eyes were sharp beneath a lace veil, her grief precise, like a performance she had rehearsed. Beside her lounged Hugo Pendergast, a young sculptor of minor renown, with wild hair and stained fingertips. She was a goddess, he muttered when offered condolences. She didn't belong in this era of clumsy thought and imitation art. His stare lingered too long on the veiled statue in the corner. Poirot noted the detail without remark. At the far end of the room stood Dr. Malcolm Blythe, a physician whose private practice had once been prestigious, but now clung to respectability by the threads of reputation and prescription pads. He spoke little, but watched everyone with a diagnostician's quiet calculation. He and Helena had exchanged letters, many, by all accounts. Helena had once called him the only man in this house who listens. Then there was Eleanor. She had been summoned reluctantly, her pale hands folded tight against her apron. Her eyes were red from crying, though whether for grief or fear was not yet certain. Poirot regarded her with unusual gentleness. "You were the last to see Madame Braithwaite alive?" She hesitated. I brought up a shawl, just after the guests began leaving. She wasn't in her room. I thought she'd gone back down. Poirot tilted his head. "And the dressing gown?" Eleanor's voice shrank. "It wasn't there. I would have noticed. The bed was made. The fire had gone cold. She had not returned," Poirot repeated, eyes narrowing slightly. "Yet later, the gown was damp upon the chaise. Did you touch it?" "I wouldn't dare." Her voice cracked. "It had frightened me." "Frightened?" Falk interjected. "Why would a damp robe frighten you, Miss Eleanor?" She said nothing, but her fingers twisted again at the silver locket she wore, as if to seal her lips. Poirot rose smoothly. "Messieurs, mesdames, I shall not keep you long today. I ask only that you remain available. A soul has departed this earth in unnatural fashion. The river has given her back, but we must ask, what did it take with it?" He turned toward the statue in the corner. "The drowned muse, still veiled. I shall begin with this, I think." "No," said Sir Leonard suddenly. "Please, not yet." Poirot paused and inclined his head. "As you wish. But the dead, monsieur, are rarely silent for long." One by one, the suspects began to drift from the room, some offering murmured condolences, others merely grateful to be excused. But Poirot remained behind, fingertips pressed together, his gaze still fixed on the black-draped figure of the statue. And as the door closed behind Eleanor, he finally said aloud, to no one in particular, "Someone has arranged this scene with care, not to reveal but to delay. Downstairs, a carriage wheel cracked on gravel, signaling another arrival, and Poirot, eyes still narrowed, whispered, 'Let us see who arrives too late, or just in time.'" Chapter 4. The arrival of Poirot's late afternoon sun caught on the tall windows of Braithwaite House, gilding the dust motes that floated through the vestibule like suspended secrets. Poirot, having retired momentarily to the small study, now returned to the main hall with the air of a man who had seen enough to grow curious, but not yet enough to act. His steps, though soft, echoed. His gray eyes missed nothing. "Has everyone departed?" he asked, his voice mild as porcelain. "Most," replied Inspector Falk, who had lingered by the sideboard, reviewing the guest list from the fete. "Dr. Blythe went to his surgery. Miss Vale claims a headache and has taken to the Rose Room. Pendergast went off muttering about light and shadows presumably to sketch. Sir Leonard's retired to his rooms, and Eleanor, in the servants' quarters. I'm not certain she should be. No, Poirot said with a raised hand. Let her be. Fear speaks only when left alone with silence. We shall hear from her in time." Poirot moved to the hall table, where a silver tray held calling cards from recent visitors and a slim envelope, untouched, addressed in thick, angular script, "To my husband. In case I am not believed." He did not touch it yet. Instead, he turned toward the front door as it opened with an unexpected creak. In stepped a woman, tall, sun-flushed, and brisk in her movements. Her traveling coat was of smart linen, her hair pinned with exactitude. She removed her gloves without greeting anyone. "I assume you're the detective," she said to Poirot, not even offering a name. "I am Hercule Poirot." "And you, madam?" "Camilla Ashworth, Helena's cousin." "I would say dear cousin, but that wouldn't be true." She dropped her bag onto a nearby bench. "I've come because I expected this to happen eventually." Falk straightened. "You anticipated her death?" Camilla turned slowly toward him, one eyebrow arched. "I anticipated she would make someone hate her enough to wish it. Whether they would go through with it, well, that's now your concern, isn't it?" Poirot watched her closely. There was no grief in her manner, no shock, but neither was it theatrical cruelty. There was something else, a calculated detachment, the kind one wears like armor. "She invited me to the fete, though she knew I wouldn't come. Said she wanted to bury old ghosts." "Which ghosts, madam?" Poirot asked softly. Camilla turned her head. "All of them, I suppose. But Helena was never good at digging deep enough. She covered wounds, not graves. Did you quarrel?" Camilla let out a sharp, humorless breath. "Not recently. Our last conversation ended with her calling me provincial. I called her unwell." Poirot nodded. "And yet you came. I read the obituary. I got on the next train. No one kills Helena Braithwaite and thinks she will stay quiet in death. She would haunt you in silk." Poirot gave the faintest smile. "Indeed." From somewhere within the house, a clock chimed 6. Camilla's gaze wandered upward. "Have you looked at the statue?" she asked. "Not yet." "You should," she said, already turning to climb the stairs. "Helena put everything in her art, even her threats, when she was gone." Falk turned to Poirot. "You believe her?" "I believe she is telling us only what serves her. But I also believe," Poirot said, finally lifting the envelope from the tray with gloved fingers, "that Madame Helena knew death was near, that she feared it would not look like drowning." He slipped the envelope into his pocket without opening it. "Not yet. Not until the room stopped pretending it had no memory." And across the corridor, from behind the drawing room door, someone else exhaled, soft, slow, listening. Chapter 5. The first interviews begin morning after Helena Braithwaite's burial arrived, reluctantly, dragging with it a sky the color of tarnished pewter. It was the kind of morning that seemed to press downward, thick with unresolved questions. Inside Braithwaite House, breakfast was taken in tense fragments, Sir Leonard declining all nourishment, Camilla sipping tea with feline detachment, and Miss Vale requesting hers in her room. Only Poirot, ever meticulous, finished his meal with quiet precision. Shortly after, he and Inspector Falk convened in the study. Poirot had arranged for each of the principal suspects to meet with him there, one by one, as he preferred. "We shall not pounce," he had said. "We shall, how do you say, allow the cat to circle the birdcage first." First came Hugo Pendergast. He sauntered into the study like a man used to being misunderstood. His trousers were paint-smudged, his cuffs unbuttoned, and his air one of thinly veiled disdain. "I suppose you'll ask where I was," he began, dropping into a chair uninvited. Poirot folded his hands. "Maintenant, monsieur. I shall ask who you were with." Hugo looked momentarily disarmed. "I was mostly with Helena, until close to midnight. We argued about the statue. I told her the drowned muse was grotesque. I said it was too literal. She told me I lacked vision. Did you follow her after that?" "No," Hugo said, but it came too quickly. He shifted. "I went to the stables. I needed air. I smoked there sometimes." "Ask the groundskeeper." Poirot nodded without confirming whether he would. "And your relationship with Madame Braithwaite? Professional? Personal?" Hugo tilted his head. "Is there always a clean line?" Poirot's smile did not reach his eyes. "There is always a line. Whether one crosses it is another matter." Pendergast scoffed. "If you think I killed her because she criticized my art, I think," Poirot interrupted softly, "that you believe grief is beneath you. That is notable." Pendergast blinked, then rose. "You've had your moment. I trust I'll be informed when you find a more credible suspect." Poirot inclined his head. "You shall be among the first to know." Next came Miss Vale, floating into the study as if the hallway were a theater aisle, and she the star of a matinee performance. She lowered herself into the chair with delicacy and produced a handkerchief already damp at the corners. "She was like a sister to me," she began, eyes shimmering. Poirot said nothing. "She was generous. You know, despite her past, people envied her, but Helena, she never let the past define her. And yet," said Poirot gently, "there was a past." Clytemnestra hesitated, the corners of her mouth stiffening. "She was complicated. That's all. A survivor. And survivors sometimes collect enemies." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did she know of any threats?" "I don't know," she said quickly. "She never said anything. But I had the sense lately she was frightened." "Of whom?" Miss Vale looked away. "Of herself, perhaps. Of where she was going. She thought people were plotting behind her back. I thought she was imagining things." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the night of the fete, I went to bed early. I wasn't feeling well." She touched her forehead. "Too much champagne. I never saw her again after 10. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said quietly. "Your devotion is memorable." She rose with an elegant flutter, brushing a speck of imaginary dust from her sleeve. But Poirot did not watch her leave. He was studying the chair she had occupied, as though the cushions retained the weight of guilt. After a pause, he rang for the next, and downstairs, in the servants' corridor, Eleanor braced herself. Her turn was coming. Chapter 6. The first false leader entered the study with hesitation stitched into every step. Her apron had been changed, but the lines of yesterday's worry were still present beneath her eyes. She clutched the silver locket at her throat as though it offered some form of protection. Poirot stood as she entered, gesturing with gentleness to the chair across from him. "You are safe, mademoiselle," he said softly. "No one here seeks to harm you. I ask only that you speak with honesty." Inspector Falk remained silent by the window, arms folded. Eleanor sat slowly, her fingers never leaving the chain around her neck. "I've never been in trouble, Monsieur Poirot. Never, not even a warning." I've served here since I was 16. You were fond of Madame Braithwaite? Eleanor hesitated. I respected her. She could be difficult, but she was kind when she wished to be. There were days she would come to the kitchen just to ask how I was. Then, days she wouldn't look at me at all. Poirot nodded. The night of the fete, what did you see? I brought up her shawl before midnight. The guests were still dancing. I went to her room, but it was empty. Everything was untouched. And the dressing gown? It wasn't there, she said again, voice trembling. But the next morning, it was soaked and lying on the chaise. That's not right. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Did Madame Braithwaite have secrets, Eleanor? Eleanor looked down. They all do, sir. But, yes, she received letters, often, and sometimes she cried after reading them. Do you know from whom? I never saw the name, but the paper was thick, expensive, and once I found a torn piece in the bin. Just a few words. The river has always watched. That's what it said. Poirot leaned back slightly. And yet, you did not say this before. I was frightened, she whispered. And I still am. Poirot stood. Then let fear speak no more. You have done well. Eleanor fled the room as though air had become scarce. Fawkes exhaled. She's hiding something. None, Poirot said, walking to the fireplace. She is concealing someone else's secret. Before Fawkes could reply, a voice rang from the hallway, sharp, accusatory. Let me speak to them. Now, the door flung open and Sir Leonard stood there, disheveled and red-eyed, brandishing a folded newspaper. It's in the press already, he growled. They've written filth. They claim she was seen that night with Hugo alone. At the water's edge, Fawkes took the paper, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't released by us. Poirot took the sheet in silence. The headline read, Braithwaite heiress found in river, artist linked to tragedy. Below, a photograph of Helena and Hugo, laughing at a prior gallery event. Sir Leonard raged on. It's a smear. He wanted her fame. He wanted her money. And I'll bet you anything he wanted her gone. Fawkes muttered. Looks bad for the boy. Poirot turned the page slowly, his voice a whisper. Sometimes the truth hides best when it is made too visible. But within the hour, Hugo Pendergast was detained in the garden, while sketching the crooked shadow of the fountain. He had said something peculiar to Constable Mooring. Funny, isn't it? That she ended up in the very spot I used to sketch her from. It was enough. The staff murmured. Sir Leonard found temporary satisfaction, and the house, briefly, exhaled. But Hercule Poirot did not. He merely looked again at the unopened envelope in his pocket, and thought, The river cannot write letters. Chapter 7. The psychological gamma. Hugo Pendergast sat in the small room off the conservatory, beneath a portrait of a sullen hunting dog. The glass panes behind him allowed the garden light to filter in, fractured by ivy and warped by age. His hands were folded, but restless fingertips stained with charcoal, tapping a rhythm neither man in the room could follow. Poirot stood not opposite, but beside him, examining the garden beyond the glass. He did not speak for some time, and when he did, his voice was quiet, almost absent-minded. It is strange, is it not, Monsieur Pendergast, how a reflection in a river can look like the truth, until one notices the ripples? Hugo glanced up. That's poetic. Is this how you interrogate people, metaphors and riddles? Poirot turned slowly, his face unreadable. No, monsieur. I only offer riddles when the truth is trying too hard to wear someone else's coat. Look, if you think I killed Helena, then just say it. But I do not. Hugo blinked. Then, why am I being kept here like a criminal? Poirot moved to the chair opposite and sat, folding his hands with slow precision. Because your innocence is too theatrical. The truth, when honest, is seldom so eager to arrive early. Meaning you are not guilty of murder, but you are guilty of something. Hugo's mouth set. I told the constable that I used to sketch Helena from the river's bend. That's not a confession. That's a memory. Poirot tilted his head. And when you chose to share why? Hugo looked away. Because I saw her there, once, a month ago. She was barefoot, just standing in the shallows, like she was trying to remember something she'd buried. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, that night, you told me you quarreled with her and then left for the stables. I did. Alone. Hugo hesitated. Yes. Poirot raised one brow. Ah, then you will forgive me if I ask you again tomorrow, and the next day. Because truth, monsieur, does not change with repetition. Lies do. The silence settled heavily between them. Then Hugo exhaled through his nose. She wasn't happy, you know, Helena. She laughed loud and touched everyone like a queen. But she wasn't happy. Why not? She said she felt followed. That someone was watching her not from outside but within the house. Poirot did not react. Did she name anyone? No. She said only, even the walls here know what I did. I thought she was being dramatic. But now, Poirot stood. Now, she is dead, and her secrets are free to scatter like dandelion seeds. He stepped toward the door, but paused. One last thing, monsieur. If I were to ask the groundskeeper where you truly were that night, would he lie for you? Hugo's face hardened. Not unless someone paid him to. Poirot nodded slightly. Then let us hope no one has reason to. He left the young man behind, tapping a small notebook gently against his palm. Outside the room, Fawkes stood waiting. You believe him now? Poirot offered a small shrug. Belief is for churches, mon ami. I accept that he did not place Helena in the river, but guilt it lingers. Like the scent of turpentine, they made their way back toward the main corridor, where the statue still stood veiled. Why keep that draped? Fawkes asked. You think it holds a clue? Poirot paused. It holds something Helena wanted seen, and someone did not want revealed too soon. Should I lift the cloth? No, said Poirot. Not yet. Let the muse remain drowned, for now. They passed through the hallway where the portrait of Lady Braithwaite, Sir Leonard's first wife, hung in regal silence. Poirot stopped there, studying the frame. She died young. Yes, Fawkes nodded. Fever, years before Helen arrived. Strange, Poirot murmured. The resemblance, not in face, but in attitude, the posture, the guarded smile, as though she, too, had known secrets too sharp to speak. They reached the stairwell just as Camilla descended. She wore riding gloves, though she had not gone riding. Her brow arched. Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, how fares your artist in captivity? He is brooding, Poirot replied, but not cracking. She smirked. He always did prefer posing to confessing. May we speak, madam? Poirot asked, in private. She hesitated, then nodded. Come. The blue salon is quieter, fewer echoes. As they walked, Poirot glanced back once, to where Eleanor hovered at the end of the corridor, her apron smudged, her eyes wide. She vanished before Fawkes could turn to see her. Poirot said nothing, but a question had bloomed silently in his mind. Who was Helena truly afraid of others, or herself? And what had she meant when she whispered, weeks before her death, some sins aren't buried, they swim? Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The blue salon was an odd choice for private conversation to Bright. Too formal. Its sea-colored walls were trimmed in silver, and the curtains had not been drawn in months. Dust flecks hung in the sunbeams like drifting pollen, and the scent of long-dried roses haunted the air. Camilla Ashworth poured herself a brandy without offering any to Poirot or Fawkes, then settled into an armchair with her gloves still on. Well then, she said, swirling the glass with idle defiance, shall we speak plainly? Poirot gave a faint bow. I always prefer it. Shall we begin with the letter? Camilla froze for the briefest moment. What letter? Poirot's gaze did not move from her face. The one Madame Braithwaite left, addressed to her husband, unopened as yet. Camilla recovered quickly, her voice cool. I wouldn't know. Helena and I were not in the habit of exchanging post-mortem correspondence. Falk cleared his throat. You seemed confident someone would eventually want her dead. That's not what I said, she replied, eyes narrowing. I said I expected it to happen. Helena drew fire. Wherever she went, sometimes without meaning to, sometimes quite deliberately. Poirot nodded slightly. She was theatrical, but afraid. Camilla's eyes flickered. She was also vindictive, and frightened people often are. Poirot leaned forward. Of what was she frightened, madam? She never told me. Camilla sipped her brandy. But I suspect it had something to do with those late-night walks to the river. She thought no one noticed. But I did. Poirot was silent for a beat. Did you follow her? I'm not foolish enough to answer that, which is not the same as saying no, Poirot murmured. Before Camilla could reply, the salon door burst open without warning. Hargrove stood in the threshold, his normally impassive face drawn tight. Pardon, Sir Monsieur Poirot, there's been an incident. Poirot rose at once. Where? In the East Wing. Sir, Lady Braithwaite's old music room. Something's been taken. And the door was forced. They followed quickly, Falk muttering curses under his breath. The music room had been unused for years. A single window faced the river, its panes dust-filmed and cracked. Inside, time had settled like a second skin. Sheet music lay yellowed and brittle across a bench. An old harpsichord loomed in the shadows, and above it, a gilt frame now hung empty. A portrait, Hargrove said. It was there yesterday evening, of Helena, painted last winter by Mr. Pendergast. Quite striking. Falk stepped forward, frowning. And no one heard anything? The door had been jammed for weeks, Hargrove said. We assumed it was simply stuck, but it looks like someone broke the hinge clean. Poirot examined the floor. Tiny wood splinters, a faint trace of something dark wax, paint. His eyes followed the ghost of a scuff mark toward the corridor. A theft. Then, Falk asked, to what end? Poirot did not answer. He was studying the hinges, then the faint groove on the inside of the frame. His fingers hovered, but did not touch. Madame Ashworth, he said without turning. Did Helena Braithwaite ever speak of a missing will? Camilla blinked. She hinted at one. Said she'd drafted a new version with a solicitor in London. Said she didn't trust the old document, but she never showed it to me. And who benefits most from the original will? Camilla's face hardened. Sir Leonard, of course. Helena was no fool. She protected her money with a fortress of clauses, but she still trusted him more than anyone else. Poirot turned now, slowly, and yet she feared someone in this house. Leonard isn't violent, she said. He's weak, but weakness can make men dangerous. Poirot moved to the doorway, Falk following. A portrait disappears. Poirot said thoughtfully, a door is broken, and something is missing, but perhaps not what we assume. Falk frowned. Then what? Poirot tapped the tip of his walking stick against the doorframe. A second truth. Mon ami. One that perhaps never wanted to be found. They turned the corner into the corridor and nearly collided with Eleanor. She had a tray in her hands, trembling faintly. Forgive me, she whispered. I heard there was trouble. I wasn't listening, I swear. Poirot's gaze softened. You are not in trouble, mademoiselle, but you have seen something. Nest's pause. Eleanor's throat worked before she spoke. Last week, I saw someone come out of the music room. After dark, I thought it was Mr. Pendergast, but now I am not so sure. Why? Falk asked quickly. Because the person moved like a woman, Eleanor whispered, and wore gloves, long, gray gloves. Poirot's eyes glittered. And yet Miss Vale wears black. Madame Ashworth tan, the only one who keeps gloves hidden in her room, unused and unworn, is Sir Leonard. Falk finished. Poirot turned toward the upper staircase. The theater continues, he murmured. But the playwright is nervous, and that is when mistakes are made. In the shadows of the music room, the faintest imprint of a heel remained in the dust. A woman's heel, pointed, delicate, recent. Chapter 9. Hidden connections. The imprint in the dust was more than a footprint. It was a signature of presence. Poirot crouched beside it, his fingertips hovering above the shallow dent, taking in its size, depth, and orientation. Then, very gently, he rose, eyes narrowed in thought. "A woman came here," he said softly. "But not for the portrait." Falk frowned, arms folded. "Then for what?" Poirot turned toward him. "Not what she took, mon ami, what she left behind." Back in the hallway, Hargrove stood at respectful attention. "Should I notify Sir Leonard?" "No," Poirot replied. "Not yet. I believe we have seen enough of the man's performance for the moment." They stepped into the corridor, and Poirot beckoned Eleanor forward. "You said the woman you saw wore long gray gloves?" She nodded, wringing her apron. "I thought nothing of it at the time." Poirot offered a gentle smile. "But that is where the truth so often resides, in the things we think nothing of." He turned to Falk. "Come. There is something I wish to examine in the late Lady Braithwaite's wardrobe." 10 minutes later, they stood in Helena's bedroom. The room had remained untouched since her death. The air was tinged with faint rose water and smoke. A dressing screen still stood angled by the window, as though she might step behind it at any moment. Poirot moved with delicate precision, opening the wardrobe and sliding dresses aside, until he reached a small velvet box on the floor. From it, he withdrew a pair of gloves, long, gray, unworn. He turned them slowly in his hands. "These were meant for display," he murmured. "Not for use." "But if Helena didn't wear them," Falk began. Poirot looked up sharply. "Then someone wore them in her place." He closed the wardrobe carefully and crossed to the vanity. There, amid the usual clutter of combs, perfume, and rouge, a powder compact lay half open. Poirot inspected it. The powder inside was unremarkable until he touched the rim. A faint smudge, barely visible. Lipstick, but not Helena's shade. He turned the compact toward Falk. "She wore coral. This is mauve." "You think someone disguised themselves as Helena?" "I think someone wished to be mistaken for her just long enough." Poirot's gaze moved to the window, overlooking the river. "The path from here leads directly to the boathouse, and just beyond, to the bend where the current slows. It is a place that would swallow a person quickly and return them only when the tides decide." A knock sounded at the door. Hargrove again. "Miss Vale wishes to speak with you, sir. She says it's urgent." Poirot glanced once at the gloves in his hand before setting them down. Of course, urgency has a peculiar habit of arriving just after the scent of exposure. They found Miss Vale in the library, her posture rigid, her expression oddly defiant. "I heard about the missing portrait," she began, "and I thought I should speak before the whispers begin." Poirot took a seat, hands neatly folded. "Please, mademoiselle, the floor is yours." "I lied," she said at once. "I did not go to bed early the night of the fete. I saw Helena leave the ballroom around 11:30. She went upstairs alone." "And you followed?" She hesitated. "No, I wanted to, but instead I went to the west balcony. I was upset. She had insulted me publicly, said I was clinging to her like a shadow, that I was a relic from another life she no longer needed." Falk raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't go after her?" "No, but I saw someone else follow her, a woman, wearing the same gown." Poirot leaned forward, his voice velvet soft. "And how could she be wearing the same gown, mademoiselle, unless it was her?" "At first, but then when I saw Helena again at midnight, she was different. Her walk, her height, her silence. She passed me in the corridor, and she didn't even look my way. She always looked." Poirot was quiet a long time. "Then, did you say anything to Sir Leonard?" "I tried, but he was already sedated, and the next morning she was dead." Falk stepped forward. "Why hide this?" It could have helped us days ago. Clytemnestra's voice was tight. Because I wanted it to be real. That moment, in the corridor. That maybe she hadn't died. That maybe the version I saw was a punishment. A ghost. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. Non, mademoiselle. It was neither ghost nor twin. It was an illusion crafted carefully for misdirection. Fawkes turned to him. You think someone impersonated Helena to confuse the timeline? Poirot nodded. Yes, and while we were all watching the river, the truth was dressing itself in borrowed silk. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. Mademoiselle Vale, one final question. The statue, the drowned muse, did you ever see it unveiled? She shook her head. Helena kept it covered. Said it was her final confession. Poirot's eyes glinted. Then I believe, mon ami, he said to Fawkes. It is time the muse was allowed to speak. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret Cluth drawing room was empty save for the veiled sculpture, standing in its corner like an unspeaking guest at a funeral. Afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, falling in streaks across the parquet floor, and catching faintly on the edges of the cloth that draped the drowned muse. Poirot stood before it in silence, not touching it, not yet. His reflection flickered dimly in the glass of a nearby cabinet. Fawkes lingered at the doorway, as if reluctant to cross the room's threshold. Are you certain about this? Fawkes asked. Nothing in life is certain, mon ami, Poirot murmured. But sometimes when a woman dies with her secrets buried in water, it is only her art that remembers the truth. With a single motion, Poirot reached out and drew the black velvet cloth away. The statue emerged from shadow. It was indeed striking, more so than either man had expected. Helena had sculpted a woman, waist deep in imagined water, with her arms outstretched and head turned slightly to the side. Her face was expressionless, but her fingers were curled as though she were trying to grasp something that had already slipped away. The drapery carved around her legs flowed like water, rippling with improbable realism. But it was not the craftsmanship that held Poirot's gaze. It was the necklace round the statue's neck, molded into the stone itself, was a replica of the very same locket Eleanor had worn when she trembled in the corridor. Small, silver, oval, and unmistakably personal. Good God, Fawkes muttered. That's her maid's locket. Poirot stepped closer, eyes sharp. Non, not hers, I think. It belonged to someone else once. Someone Helena wished to remember or perhaps to accuse. His fingers hovered over the statue's base. There, nearly hidden in the folds of Fawkes' marble drapery, was a line of inscription, barely legible. She drowned because she was made to wait. Poirot exhaled slowly. This was not sculpture, mon ami. This was confession. Fawkes knelt to read the base more closely. But what does it mean? Poirot's eyes were distant. It means she believed the death to come was already begun long before the river took her. He turned from the statue, moving toward the fireplace. She felt pursued. She felt watched. And she knew that someone in this house had already rehearsed the act of disappearing her. Fawkes followed. You're thinking of the missing will. I am thinking, Poirot said, of something far older than that. A previous betrayal. A drowning. Perhaps not literal but social, emotional. Something Helena had tried to resurrect in marble. Poirot tapped the mantelpiece gently. When an artist sculpts a likeness, she is not simply recreating flesh. She is capturing intention. And this statue is not Helena. Fawkes looked again. Then who? Poirot turned, eyes narrowing. It is a woman who drowned long ago, who never returned. A woman who also lived in this house, and whose memory Helena could not escape. Lady Evelyn Braithwaite. Sir Leonard's first wife. Fawkes' jaw tightened. But she died of fever, did she? Poirot's voice dropped. Or was that simply what the house was told? A long silence fell between them. Poirot moved toward the side table and opened a small drawer. Inside were Helena's sketchbooks. He had noticed them before, but not studied them. Now, with slow care, he opened one page after page, poses, drapery, expressions. But at the center of the book was a single page unlike the others. A name written in jagged charcoal, Evelyn, beneath it. A drawing not of a face, but of two hands clutching one another, one dragging the other beneath water. Poirot closed the book. She believed Evelyn's death had not been illness. She believed it was murder. Fawkes' breath hitched. And she told someone who had reason to keep that story quiet. Poirot nodded slowly. And so she became the second muse to drown. Fawkes turned back to the statue. But what of Eleanor? The locket? Her silence? Poirot's gaze darkened. She is the thread, not the web. I suspect she knew Evelyn. Perhaps even before she came here. A child, maybe a niece, or a ward passed quietly from hand to hand. And she recognized something in Helena's fear of repetition. Fawkes' brow furrowed. Then why not speak? Because people like Eleanor have always known speaking means risking not being believed. Or worse. Poirot stepped away from the statue, folding his hands behind his back. I now believe there are two crimes in this house. One committed years ago, and another its mirror committed just days ago. One buried in silence, the other drowned in silk. He looked toward the door, and it is time, I think, to speak to Sir Leonard Braithwaite. Fawkes hesitated. And what will you ask him? Poirot allowed himself the faintest smile. I shall ask him, he said, why both his wives died in water. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. Rear Leonard Braithwaite received them in his study, an oak-paneled room lined with unread books and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. He stood behind the desk, stiff and unmoving, as though rooted by obligation. His waistcoat had been rebuttoned incorrectly, a small thing, but Poirot, as ever, noticed. I assume, Leonard said dryly, that your presence means something else has gone wrong. Poirot bowed. On the contrary, monsieur, it means something is beginning to go right. Inspector Fawkes remained silent by the door, arms crossed. The room's only window looked out toward the river, where the water lay still beneath a heavy sky. Poirot stepped forward, unhurried. You are not a man who enjoys chaos, he began. This study is arranged like a chessboard, symmetrical, defensive, controlled. And yet, chaos has found its way to your house. Twice. Sir Leonard's face twitched. I won't listen to metaphors. Say what you've come to say. Poirot nodded. I have come to speak of Evelyn Braithwaite, your first wife. The name hung in the air like a bell's toll. Sir Leonard did not blink. She died of fever. It was sudden, tragic, and yet no physician from the village was called. Leonard's mouth opened, then shut again. Poirot's tone remained gentle. A woman who had no family, whose death was never fully examined, and whose memory you entombed in the East Wing until your second wife chose to exhume her in art. Leonard turned away abruptly, one hand gripping the back of the leather chair. I don't know what Helena believed. She grew erratic, obsessed. She saw shadows where there were none. She sculpted Evelyn's face from memory. Poirot said, and placed Eleanor's locket around the statue's neck. You do not find that significant. It's a locket, Leonard muttered. She had many, but this one, Poirot continued, stepping forward, was Evelyn's nest's paws, and Eleanor kept it because she was not merely a maid. She was once a child in this house. Too young to speak when Evelyn died, but not too young to remember. Leonard turned, his expression unreadable. This is conjecture. It is memory, monsieur. Memory carved in stone, and buried again by fear. There was a brittle pause. Poirot folded his hands. Why did you never remarry until years later? I did, Leonard said too quickly. Poirot's eyes glinted. No, monsieur, you did not. You withdrew from society. You locked away the music room. You let the house fall into silence. Until Helena arrived and disturbed the stillness. Leonard's voice cracked. She asked questions that had no answers, or ones you didn't want to give. Poirot stepped to the desk, where a decanter sat half empty. He touched nothing, but glanced meaningfully toward the glass. She knew about the river. He said softly, "She knew Evelyn's drowning had been covered as illness. Perhaps not by you, but by someone close to you, a servant, a friend. And she meant to uncover it." Fawkes spoke up, quiet but firm. "She wrote a letter before she died. Addressed to you." Leonard's eyes dropped. "I haven't read it." Poirot withdrew the sealed envelope from his pocket and laid it on the desk between them. "You knew it was here?" "I guessed. You feared what it would contain." Leonard did not respond, but his fingers trembled slightly as they hovered near the envelope. Poirot watched him. "She was not the kind of woman who left things unsaid," he murmured. Even in death, the room was thick with the weight of decades of silence, grief, and something sour. "I did not kill Evelyn," Leonard said at last. "I loved her, but you let the truth rot," Poirot replied. "And sometimes, monsieur, decay is as deadly as the blow." Leonard looked up, his face suddenly old. "Helena wasn't afraid of me," he whispered. "She was afraid of herself." Poirot said nothing. "I saw her on the stairs that night. Her face, she was somewhere else. She said she came back. Evelyn came back, and then she walked into the dark like she was chasing a ghost." "Then who chased her?" "I don't know," Leonard said. But Poirot was already turning away. "No," he said softly. "But someone else does." Later that evening, the air in Braithwaite House shifted. The suspects began to draw lines between one another quietly, deliberately. Fawkes observed it first, Clytemnestra Vale whispering to Camilla behind the linen door, Hugo Pendergast staring too long at Eleanor during supper, Sir Leonard avoiding every eye. The room buzzed with unspoken questions. Poirot, for his part, said very little. He moved as though listening to music no one else could hear. He stopped by the statue once, touching the base lightly, and smiled without joy. When supper ended, he stood slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, with calm authority, "you have all been most cooperative. But tomorrow I shall require your presence, all of you, together, in the drawing room." "Why?" Camilla asked. "Because," Poirot replied, "the river has returned all it can. Now it is your turn." And with that, he retired, leaving behind a room full of people who no longer trusted one another. Not fully. Not anymore. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Morning came bruised with cloud and cold light. Mist clung to the hedgerows, softening the outlines of Braithwaite House until it looked more ruin than residence. The hush that had settled over the manor the night before had only deepened. No laughter, no clinking porcelain, no conversation. Even the river beyond the estate grounds seemed to wait. In the small breakfast parlor, Hugo Pendergast sipped coffee alone, his sketchbook closed before him like a sealed confession. Across the hall, Miss Vale paced behind the parlor curtains, chain-smoking in tight circles, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she crushed one cigarette after another into a jade ashtray. Upstairs, Sir Leonard remained locked in his rooms. Camilla Ashworth had not yet emerged, and Eleanor, quietest of all, moved ghost-like through the hallways, dusting where no dust gathered, folding linens that had already been folded. At 10 o'clock precisely, Poirot summoned them. They gathered, as instructed, in the drawing room, the same room where Helena had performed her final soliloquy, where champagne had once been passed with flirtations, and where the drowned muse now stood unveiled, staring sightless into the space between them. Poirot did not stand at the center of the room. Instead, he remained seated in the high-backed chair beside the fireplace, his hands steepled, his gaze fixed on each person in turn. Fawkes stood just behind him, notebook in hand but untouched. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began quietly, "thank you for coming. You may wonder why I have asked this of you, and I shall tell you. The murderer sits among us." No one moved. Not a breath stirred. Poirot continued, "But before I reveal them, You must understand, this crime was not born in a moment. It is the fruit of a seed planted years ago. Long before Helena Braithwaite ever stepped into this house, he turned toward the statue. This figure that drowned Muse is not a work of vanity, but a confession. It is Evelyn Braithwaite, lady of this house before Helena, who died under what we were told were natural circumstances. But Helena did not believe it. She believed Evelyn had been erased. Camilla stirred. "This is melodrama." "No, madam," Poirot said evenly. "It is motive." He rose now, moving slowly to the veiled canvas propped against the far wall, a replacement brought in by Hargrove that morning. Poirot removed the cloth, revealing a portrait of Helena, pale, somber, dressed in lavender. Her eyes fixed not on the viewer, but on something behind her shoulder. Her expression was one of restrained terror. This, Poirot said, was painted the week she died. What frightened her was not death, but the face she had seen reflected behind her. He turned. A face she recognized, one that had returned from the past. Hugo stepped forward, voice tight. "Are you saying Evelyn didn't die?" Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur. Evelyn is long dead. But someone in this house feared that the truth of her death might be unearthed. Someone who helped cover it up, and who would do anything to prevent history from repeating itself." He paused before the hearth. "Let us speak then of the night Helena died. She left the ballroom just before midnight. She ascended the stairs and returned to her room. We know this because Eleanor found the bed untouched, the fire gone cold, the shawl still folded. Yet someone dressed in her gown was seen again that same night. Someone shorter, slighter, wearing gray gloves." Poirot let the weight of silence fall again. "Miss Vale," he said gently, "you said you saw Helena in the corridor after midnight, but you did not. You saw someone made to look like her." Clytemnestra blinked rapidly. "Then who?" Poirot's voice was silk now. "Eleanor." The maid stepped back, shaking her head. "No, I never. You did not kill her," Poirot said, raising a hand. "But you were used, manipulated. You were asked to fetch the gown, to press it. You were told Helena needed it for a final portrait. And when she died, when she was drowned, someone placed that same gown back in her room, still damp, to sell the illusion that she had returned after death." Camilla's voice cut across the room like a blade. "This is madness." "No, madam," Poirot said, turning to her. "This is intent." He stepped forward. "You have worn gloves to hide what you did not want noticed. You broke into the music room and removed the portrait of Evelyn because Helena had painted it again. You feared that sculpture, that it would link Helena's suspicions to your past." Camilla's expression flickered. "Why would I care what she painted?" "Because you were Evelyn's cousin," Poirot said gently. "And more than that, her rival. You loved Leonard. You watched Evelyn marry him. And when she threatened to leave him, when she discovered he was not the man, she thought you saw your chance." Fawkes' eyes widened. "You think Camilla killed both women?" Poirot's voice dropped. "I believe she helped silence one and killed the other. Helena's death was not spontaneous, it was a rehearsal. Camilla lured her to the river. Helena, filled with dread, may have gone willingly, but she did not fall. She was held under." Camilla's face drained of color. I never touched her." Poirot stepped back. "You did not need to. You only needed her to believe that Evelyn had come back to claim her." Clytemnestra gasped. You dressed as her." Camilla's shoulders shook, but she did not weep. She lifted her chin. "She should have left it alone," she whispered. "She should have left Evelyn in peace." Poirot bowed his head once. "You ensured she never would." And in the hush that followed, the house itself seemed to exhale like something long buried had finally risen from the silt and been named. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Heath drawing room did not erupt. It did not shatter under the weight of accusation. Instead, it held its silence like a tomb. Camilla Ashworth stood very still, her gloves now in plain sight, one finger twitching against the side seam of her coat. She had not denied it, that more than anything, struck the room dumb. Poirot stepped back into the hush, his voice gentler than it had been. "You see, madam, the truth waits, patiently, sometimes for years. It waited in the stone, in the locket, in the eyes of a maid who remembered more than she was meant to. And now it waits for you." Camilla did not move. Clytemnestra took a step forward, her eyes wide. "You let us believe she drowned alone," she whispered. "You said Helena was mad." Camilla's gaze flit to her, then to Leonard, who now looked ashen and strangely diminished. He said nothing, his eyes bloodshot, focused not on Camilla, but on the statue beside him. A sound escaped from Camilla, then not a sob, but a low, animal exhale. Her body, so perfectly postured only moments before, began to shift. "You are wrong," she said quietly. "You think I wanted Helena dead. I didn't." Poirot remained still. "But you feared her, and fear, madam, is the twin sister of hate." She looked down, then slowly began to unbutton her coat. Beneath it, she wore dark walking clothes, practical, unadorned. Inspector Fawkes stepped forward at once. "Don't." But Camilla was already moving. In a flash of motion, she turned on her heel, shoved past Eleanor, who gasped and dropped her tray and bolted through the door. Poirot did not chase her. "Let her go," he said calmly, but only for a moment. Fawkes was already in pursuit, his heavy footfall echoing down the corridor. Camilla dashed through the vestibule, out the side door, and into the fog-drenched garden beyond. The ground was soft with dew and churned mud. She moved like she had rehearsed this run before, like the path had already been mapped in her mind. The river waited at the bottom of the garden, dark and slow-moving. Mist coiled over its surface in long, dragging fingers. Camilla reached the bank and stopped, chest heaving. Her coat hung loose behind her, and one glove had fallen somewhere along the run. Poirot arrived behind Fawkes moments later, less hurried, more assured. He watched as the woman stood at the edge of the river, her boots near the water, her eyes locked on the current. She did not look back. "Camilla," Poirot called softly. "It is over." She didn't answer. "I understand," he said, moving closer. "To watch someone live a life that should have been yours, to endure their triumphs, their whims, their cruelty, to see them grow careless with what you once begged for." Still, she said nothing. Evelyn was going to leave Leonard, wasn't she? A pause. "Yes," she said at last. Her voice was a whisper the river almost stole. "She told me so. Said she'd take what she had left and go to her sister in Devon." Said Leonard he was cruel in the quiet way, the polite way, the kind that makes you question your own name. Poirot nodded, slowly. "And you believed she would never recover from such a fall, that she'd be laughed at, forgotten, so you helped." Camilla turned, her face pale and luminous in the mist. "I only wanted her to sleep. I thought, perhaps a tonic, something strong, just to make her still. But she collapsed. Her head struck the wash basin, and then Leonard found me beside her, holding her hand." Fawkes approached slowly now, cuffs ready. "He helped you cover it up?" "No," Camilla said bitterly. "He told me to disappear. Said if I stayed, people would talk. So I left. But I never truly left." Poirot stepped beside her, now only a pace away. "And when Helena started asking questions, I returned. She welcomed me like a sister." Camilla's voice cracked. "And then she found Evelyn's letters, and the painting, and she sculpted that." She turned toward the river again. "I told her not to show it, that it would only hurt people, that some truths only cause rot. But she wouldn't listen." Poirot watched her in silence. "I didn't mean to kill her," Camilla said. "She followed me to the river. She was angry, shouting. I tried to silence her. I grabbed her by the shoulders. She slipped. It was muddy. Her head struck the edge of the mooring stone. She didn't move." Fawkes moved forward, placing a hand on her arm. "She did not resist." "Poirot," His voice, quiet as dusk, said, "And so you placed her in the water." Just as Evelyn had been left in silence, in shame, Camilla looked at him then. Eyes rimmed red but dry. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, if Evelyn had lived, do you think she would have forgiven me?" Poirot met her gaze with grave finality. "I think, madam, that she would have pitied you. Which is, perhaps, worse." She said nothing more. As Falk led her away, the mist thickened, swallowing her figure in shades of gray. Poirot remained by the riverbank, alone. The reeds rustled gently. The river moved on, as it always did, but it no longer kept its secret. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into Placide House had gone still again, but the stillness was different now, less like breath being held, more like breath being released. Camilla Ashworth had been escorted from the premises under discreet guard. No handcuffs, no formal arrest, not yet. But the weight of what she had confessed would move faster than any constable's pen. Back in the drawing room, the remaining guests had drifted to their respective corners, disheveled and shaken like players. After a closing curtain, the statue stood exposed, its chiseled sorrow no longer a mystery, but a monument. Poirot stood before it one last time. She drowned because she was made to wait. He repeated softly, "Yes, but it was not the river that waited. It was Camilla, waiting for time, for silence, for fear to do what guilt could not." He did not speak to Falk, who stood behind him, nor to Clytemnestra, who sat curled on the chaise like a half-collapsed marionette. His voice was for the house itself now. She did not push Evelyn, perhaps not even Helena, but intent as gravity, mon ami. One need not throw the stone if they dig the path where it will fall. Falk exhaled, breaking the hush. So that's it. Camilla was the link between the two deaths. Guilt, opportunity, fear, and a talent for silence. Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, but there remains one more matter." He turned, eyes landing on Eleanor, who stood near the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Would you come here, mademoiselle?" he asked, with a softness that was almost paternal. She approached cautiously. In her hands was the silver locket, clutched once again like a relic. Poirot gestured to a small chair. "Sit, s'il vous plaît." Eleanor obeyed. "You kept this locket," Poirot said, "not for vanity, not for value, but because it once belonged to Evelyn Braithwaite." "Yes," Eleanor gave a small nod. "I don't remember much. I was so young, but I remember her humming. She used to brush my hair. I didn't know who she was, not really. Just someone who felt like home. And when she vanished, I was sent away for schooling, then returned years later as staff. I didn't even know it was the same house, not at first." Poirot sat opposite her now. "But then you saw the statue." She nodded again. "The locket, the eyes. I remembered her voice in my dreams. I knew Helena wasn't sculpting herself. She was sculpting her." Poirot folded his hands. "And you never told anyone?" "I was afraid," she whispered, "of being wrong, of losing my job, of being laughed at. I thought, if Helena was right, she'd expose it. And if she wasn't, then nothing would change anyway." Poirot leaned forward. "You were the one who found the letter Helena wrote, not Sir Leonard. You placed it on the hall tray the morning after the death, hoping it would be read." She looked at him in wide-eyed astonishment. How could you know that?" "Because only someone with a key to Helena's writing desk could have retrieved it. And Madame Ashworth did not know it existed. But you Whodunit is attentive. You saw what others did not, and you placed it carefully where it would not accuse directly, but invite discovery." Eleanor looked down, her voice shaking. "I didn't know who killed her, only that she'd tried to tell someone, and I didn't want her voice to vanish too." Poirot nodded, standing. "You were brave, mademoiselle, in your own way, and I believe you gave Helena the only justice you could." She clutched the locket once more. As though it had heard him, from across the room, Sir Leonard finally stirred. He had remained seated the entire morning, pale and unmoving. Now he rose slowly, his hands braced against the armrests. "Will I be charged?" he asked, voice hollow. Poirot looked at him evenly. "You are guilty of silence, monsieur, and of cowardice, but the law, I think, will have little interest in that. It is the court of memory where your sentence will be served." Leonard gave a dry, short nod. "Then I suppose I deserve it." Fawkes cleared his throat. "And the will?" Poirot turned. "There was never a revised one, I think. Merely the threat of one." Helena knew how to leverage uncertainty. "But it matters little now. The truth was never in the document, it was in the sculpture. That was her final act of testament." He glanced again at the statue. She knew someone would try to bury her story again, and so she carved it in stone. Poirot looked round the room once more. Then to Fawkes. "It is finished." That evening, the mist began to lift. The house, still bruised by memory, began to breathe again. The drawing room was closed. The statue covered once more, not as a secret, but as a symbol of rest. Poirot prepared for his departure. His small valise stood ready by the door, his head already in hand. As he stepped outside, Eleanor approached him one last time. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." He gave her a small bow. "No, mademoiselle. Thank you. You gave voice to those who were silenced." He turned to the waiting car. As they drove away, the river came into view once more, broad, dark, and gently stirring. It carried many things. That river. But now, at last, it no longer carried a lie. Chapter 15. The final gathering. As the mist lifted, and Poirot departed the grounds of Braithwaite House, the house itself remained steeped in the aftershock of revelation. The truth had been unearthed, yes, but like any long-buried artifact, it had not emerged without fracture. There were splinters still, emotional, relational, and legal, that would take longer to settle than a murder's resolution. 3 days later, by Poirot's written request, a final gathering was held in the Oak Library. This time, it was not for confrontation, but for reckoning. Inspector Fawkes presided quietly, taking notes as needed. But it was not his voice the room awaited. It was Sir Leonard's. He stood now at the center, thinner than he had been, his cheeks slightly hollowed, but his posture less defensive, more fragile in its honesty. "I owe each of you an apology," he began, voice low. "I see now that my silence was not the absence of wrongdoing, but its accomplice. Evelyn was not murdered by a stranger in the night, nor by poison or push. She was undone by a long erosion of spirit, by betrayal, by grief, and yes, by being left alone in a house that had promised her safety." He looked toward Eleanor, who remained standing by the window. "I did not kill her," Leonard said quietly, "but I allowed her death to be rewritten. And when Helena began to peel back the curtain, I turned my face away again. It is a thing I shall carry." No one interrupted. Across the room, Hugo Pendergast shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his sketchbook unopened for once. "And what of Helena's work?" he asked at last. "What happens to the drowned muse now?" Leonard glanced at Poirot, who merely inclined his head. "It will not be destroyed," Leonard said. "She created it for a reason, and though it cuts, it also remembers. It will be placed in the chapel hall, beneath her name." Clytemnestra Vale, now dressed in a somber navy frock, raised her eyes. "And the guests who see it, what will you tell them?" "The truth," Leonard said. At last, Poirot, standing near the mantel, finally spoke. "It is not often that one sees a man choose public memory over personal comfort. I commend you, Sir Leonard. But remember, redemption is not performance, it is endurance." A quiet murmuring of assent passed through the room. Then Poirot turned to Eleanor, whose face had remained unreadable. "Mademoiselle, you may not wear the title of heiress or sculptor, but you have become, in essence, the keeper of both women's stories. What will you do with that?" Eleanor did not answer immediately. She looked to the window instead, out toward the newly trimmed hedgerows and the river just beyond. which now gleamed in slants of reluctant sunlight. "I will stay," she said at last, "at least for a time. The house needs voices, and someone to remember them not as myths, but as people." Poirot nodded once, then addressed the room. "You each knew Helena in your own way. Some admired her, some envied her, some feared her. But none of you, I think, truly saw the way she listened to the ghosts, to the cracks in the house, to the stories beneath polite conversation. She was not mad. She was vigilant." He moved toward the doorway. "I have nothing further to reveal, but I would ask this of you all: do not let her death be the end of a quarrel, or a piece of gossip to trade at garden parties. Let it be a beginning, a place where truth was finally spoken aloud." They rose as he stepped out, as if compelled by something unspoken. Poirot paused just long enough to bow slightly at the waist. Not a theatrical gesture, a farewell. Outside, the day had shifted. The clouds had thinned. The air no longer smelled of damp roses and rot dot as he passed the river one last time. He turned toward it. "Now, madam," he whispered, addressing neither Evelyn nor Helena, but something larger, something ancestral and quiet. "You may sleep." That evening, the guests began to leave Braithwaite House, their carriages creaking away over gravel softened by fog and time. Hugo was the first to go, muttering that he needed the light of his own studio to make sense of what he'd seen. He left behind several sketches, most of them torn in half. Clytemnestra departed next, her eyes drier than before. She paused at the statue one final time, reaching out as if to touch it, then choosing not to. Only Leonard and Eleanor remained later. Long after supper, Eleanor wandered into the drawing room and stood before the covered sculpture. She lit a single candle. Then, with quiet hands, she pulled the cloth away. The face beneath was no longer terrifying. It was simply tired, honest. Whole. Eleanor placed the locket at the base of the statue and stepped back. And for a moment, with the candle's glow flickering against the carved marble, it looked as though the muse might speak. But she didn't. She only listened. And this time, there was finally nothing left to hide. Chapter 16. The Revellenden. 3 days later, the morning sun filtered through gauze curtains into Hercule Poirot's private apartment, casting orderly lines of light across polished floors. The detective sat at his breakfast table, dressed immaculately in a dove-gray suit, his napkin creased with surgical precision. A cup of thick black coffee cooled slowly in his hand. Untouched. Before him laid envelopes. One was from Inspector Falk, postmarked from Incombe Hollow, containing a short note of gratitude and a neatly typed summary of Camilla Ashworth's impending arraignment. The second was handwritten, on lavender stationery, sealed in wax. Poirot opened the latter carefully. "Monsieur Poirot, you said to let this be a beginning. I am trying. The house is quiet now, but not empty. I have moved into the East Wing. I light a candle for Helena every night. I polish Evelyn's frame, even though it still waits for her photo to return. Hargrove remains. So do the shadows, but I believe they are softer now. Thank you for seeing what others wouldn't, or couldn't." Eleanor Poirot read it twice. Then he set it beside his saucer and finally took a sip of his coffee. The taste, though bitter, was oddly comforting. Later that day, at Scotland Yard, Poirot met briefly with Falk. The inspector had called him in to provide final notes. Before Camilla Ashworth's formal statement was processed, the room was dim, unadorned, and strictly utilitarian, very unlike Braithwaite House, which had carried its sins in lace and would grain. Falk stood by the window, flipping through typed pages. "She gave a full confession," he said, though carefully worded. "She maintains she didn't mean to kill Helena, but she admits to staging the aftermath, the dressing, the placement in the river, the false appearance of Helena walking again that night." Poirot nodded once. "She wished to confuse the timeline, to cast doubt on the moment of death. A clever tactic, but unnecessary." Helena was already dead when Camilla began her performance. Fawkes looked up. "You really believe it was an accident?" "I believe," Poirot replied, "that the act was impulsive, but the aftermath was planned. That distinction will matter only slightly in the courts. But morally," he paused, "morally, it is damning." Fawkes leaned on the desk. "And Leonard?" Poirot's brow furrowed slightly. "A man who built his life around avoidance. He will live out his days haunted by two women, one he failed and one he lost. And the estate remains his, though I believe he will not stay long. I suspect it will pass eventually to Eleanor, if not in name, then in spirit. The house knows who belongs to it." Fawkes gave a dry chuckle. "You talk about that place like it's a living thing." Poirot looked at him carefully. "Is it not? Every wall, every window, every floorboard worn by steps and secrets. And Combe Hollow was never just backdrop, it was complicit. It swallowed two women, and it allowed a third to resurrect them." The inspector glanced again at the file. "Still, you nearly lost her." Poirot's expression softened. "Helena, no Camilla. If she'd made it to the river before we reached her." Poirot nodded. "She would have disappeared in the same way she had once helped Evelyn vanish. The symmetry would have been almost a perfect." He turned toward the door, but paused. "There is something I never shared with you, mon ami." "The letter Helena wrote, the one addressed to Leonard?" Fawkes straightened. "You still have it?" "I did." Poirot reached into his inner coat pocket and withdrew the folded sheet. "I opened it only after she was buried." He placed it gently on the desk. Fawkes read the first lines aloud. "To my husband, I do not know whether I am mad, or whether you are simply blind, but I feel Evelyn in these walls, in the river, in the hush between footsteps, and someone is trying to make me join her." The rest was shorter. A line about Camilla's glances, a line about Eleanor's locket, a final sentence, carefully penned. "If I am wrong, forgive me. If I am right, you already know." Fawkes closed the letter with quiet reverence. "She was brilliant," he said. "In her own way." Poirot smiled faintly. "She was an artist, and artists, even in death, find a way to tell their stories." He turned to leave. Outside, the streets of London bustled. Carriages rattled past. Children laughed. A newsboy shouted something about a scandal involving a bishop and a baker. Life, as ever, went on. Poirot walked slowly, his steps deliberate. There was no triumph in his bearing, no boast, only the stillness of a man who had peeled back another layer of human nature and found beneath it not evil, but damage, fear, the quiet rot of secrets too long buried. He paused at a florist, purchased a small white lily, and tucked it into the brim of his hat. Then, with a final glance at the sky gray but clearing, he disappeared into the crowd. Behind him, the river was far away now, but not forgotten. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice's Trial of Camilla Ashworth. When it came, was swift but not sensational. Her confession so deliberate, so composed, was enough to stave off the prying appetite of the tabloids. Sir Leonard did not testify. Neither did Eleanor. The court accepted Camilla's version of events. An argument turned tragic. A panic-born cover-up. A crime tethered not to malice but to an ancient grief. But Poirot, who followed the proceedings only through correspondence and Inspector Fawkes' occasional letters, knew better. The court had spoken of manslaughter. Poirot had seen something far more complex, the shape of a woman consumed by time, envy, and the need to control a narrative long denied her. The judge handed down a sentence of 5 years, not imprisonment, but confinement to a convalescent institution, one of those respectable houses by the coast, where silence passed for treatment and remorse was measured in obedience. Camilla did not protest. She went quietly. Poirot did not attend the sentencing. He had already turned his attention to other matters, other puzzles. But on a quiet morning in early autumn, nearly a month after the final gathering at Braithwaite House, he received a parcel wrapped in brown paper and sealed with red wax. It was from Eleanor. Inside was a letter and a photograph. Monsieur Poirot, I thought you should know what became of it. After much thought, I decided not to keep the sculpture here. It no longer belongs to the house, not now. I arranged for it to be displayed in the small chapel gallery on the village green, the one where Evelyn used to bring me to watch the sun through stained glass. The plaque beneath it bears both names, Evelyn Braithwaite and Helena Braithwaite, and the words, "Not forgotten." People come quietly. Some leave flowers. No one speaks. But something in the room feels different now, less guarded, more awake. I hope that is what justice feels like. Eleanor Poirot studied the photograph for a long time. The statue stood beneath a stained glass window, its pale marble face softened by colored light. There was no rope around it, no velvet barrier. Just space and stillness, and perhaps a kind of peace. Meanwhile, Sir Leonard Braithwaite left the estate quietly and without ceremony. Word came through Falk that he had gone to a modest home in Sussex, far from rivers and memories. He declined interviews. He left no forwarding address. He did, however, donate the remainder of Helena's unfinished works to a museum in Bath, with one stipulation, that the final piece, the Muse, never be sold. There were whispers, of course. The society pages speculated. Was there another heir? Would Eleanor remain? Was a new master of Braithwaite House to be announced? But Poirot knew better. Some stories are not meant to be extended. Some endings, when earned, must be left to settle. Clytemnestra Vale resumed her performances in Brighton, though her voice, so once rich with melancholic longing, was reportedly less steady. In one performance of Antigone, she faltered during the final monologue and left the stage without explanation. Those in the audience said she looked as though she had seen someone waiting in the wings. Hugo Pendergast vanished into a season of grim abstraction, producing a set of canvases titled Figures in Fog. Critics called them unsettlingly honest. He did not disagree. Inspector Falk remained at his post, promoted quietly for the tact and discretion with which he handled the Braithwaite case. His letters to Poirot, though brief, often carried small reflections on guilt, on time, on the strange machinery of justice. In one, he wrote, "I used to think murder was about motive. Now I think it's about silence. Who keeps it? Who breaks it? Who gets buried inside it?" Poirot pinned that line to his study wall. And Eleanor stayed. She kept the house, not as mistress, but as steward. She opened the doors to local historians, offered tea to curious neighbors. The east wing was repaired. The ivy was trimmed. The piano was tuned again. In spring, a group of children came to play in the garden. They didn't know the history. They only knew the trees were tall and the air smelled of rosemary. She let them laugh. She even joined them once, just briefly, before returning to the quiet of the corridor, where her own childhood had once gone missing. She never replaced the locket. She didn't need to. The truth, once told, was its own heirloom. As for Poirot, he watched the seasons change from his apartment window in London. He polished his silver mustache comb. He arranged his books in alphabetical and moral order. He solved for cases in as many weeks, each one more ordinary than the last. But he thought often of Braithwaite House, not of the murders, not of Camilla. He thought of the candle Eleanor lit at dusk, of the soft brushing of Evelyn's ghost across time, of the statue that no longer needed to be seen to be believed, and he thought of Helena, flawed, bold, defiant, who had drowned not in water, but in truth. In the quiet, he whispered, "You were right, madam." They listened, and this time they remembered. Chapter 18, the closing remark. Year turned. Summer's green faded to rust and gold, and Incombe Hollow folded once more into its hushed cycle of mists and memory. Tourists passed through the village less frequently now, and the Braithwaite name, so recently resurgent in whispers and newspaper clippings, faded back into polite silence. But Hercule Poirot, who had by then moved on to a case involving a vanished violinist and a suspicious will in Vienna. Carried the memory with him still. It returned to him one fog-laced morning, as he stood aboard a small ferry crossing the Danube. The air was damp, the water below smooth as burnished glass. The silence, familiar. And it was then he realized, some truths never sink. They merely wait for stillness. He turned to Hastings, who had joined him briefly for this journey, and said, apropos of nothing, "My friend, do you recall the Braithwaite affair?" Hastings blinked. "The one with the statue and the river?" "Of course I do. Nasty business. Ghastly sort of poetry about it." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but you see, that was the point. The killer did not simply commit a crime. She composed one." Hastings frowned. "You mean Camilla?" "Oui. She killed not out of greed, nor even revenge. She killed to edit history, to reclaim a role she had been denied. She wrote herself into the story she felt she had been cut from. And Helena? She refused to let the old lies go unchallenged. That is why she sculpted Evelyn, not out of admiration but out of justice. Helena understood that to tell the truth, one must show it." Hastings shook his head. "So she paid with her life." Poirot's voice lowered. "Truth is always bought with something, mon ami. In this case, it was paid for in memory, in stone, and in the choice to listen." They stood in silence then, watching the river slip past them like the hush between spoken words. Back in Incombe Hollow, the statue remained. Visitors came and went, but the story behind the sculpture was never plastered on plaques or whispered in the vestry. It was passed instead in quiet nods, in the gesture of a hand brushing over carved marble, in the way the vicar paused just slightly longer at the names carved below the base. Evelyn Braithwaite, Helena Braithwaite, not forgotten. Eleanor, older now, still polished the woodwork on Sundays. She refused offers to sell the house. She taught herself to garden, and some evenings she played the harpsichord in the east wing, its music slow, minor, and haunting. One such evening, a letter arrived. It bore the fine script of a foreign hand, and no return address. "Mademoiselle, you have done well. You have kept the silence where it belonged and broken it where it must. Justice is not always a gavel. Sometimes it is a room kept open, a light not turned off, a name remembered. I remain, with great respect." Hercule Poirot placed the letter in a frame and kept it beside the locket on her shelf. That night, she lit 2 candles, one for each name on the sculpture, and outside, the river moved as it always had. But now, at last, it moved without a secret.